everyone. My name is Andrew. I serve at Providence Church as a pastor here in Omaha. And today I'm joined by some friends, and we're going to be discussing the idea of global missions, or God's heart for the nations. You know, we believe as Christians that God created this world, and in Genesis 1, we see that he created it for his glory and for the good of his creation. And so as he creates the world, he creates these humans, these image bearers, Adam and Eve, and they're supposed to reflect God's glory. And he commands them to fill the earth, to go and multiply to the whole earth so that all of the earth would be filled with his glory. But if you've read through the Bible, you know that that story didn't actually play out. We see that humans didn't actually live to glorify God, but they've lived in rebellion from God. They're not for him, but against him. We haven't lived to reflect God's glory, but we've looked to have glory for ourselves. And so in God's great grace, he set out a plan to redeem a people back to himself. He started with this man named Abraham, and he said that he was going to make Abraham's family and create them to be a blessing to the nations. He created this people, Israel, and from there, he said that they would live as a holy people so that all the nations would know that God is real. That nation of Israel turned into the church, and today we see that our command as the church is to make disciples of all the nations. From the beginning until now, God's heart has been that he would have a people that is redeemed, set apart, so that all the nations would know that he is God. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. This idea that God is creating a people for himself to not only be from the nations, but to actually be a part of his mission to reach the nations. And so I'm joined here by a few friends, members at Providence Church, and we're just going to talk about their involvement in global missions. And to be honest, part of my goal is for you to hear their stories, but in some ways, for you to also find your place in the global mission of God. So I want to just kind of share for you guys, give a little bit of your involvement in global missions, both kind of past and present. So maybe share your name and then just some of your involvement past and present in global missions.
So I'm Hosanna, and I grew up as a missionary kid in Southeast Asia. So kind of grew up in that culture of trying to figure out where I fit, where my skin tone is not normal, and why I was there. And then about in high school, I decided that this is something that I really care about. And so ever since then, I've been on this journey, on this track to pursue cross-cultural missions with my life.
I'm Cindy, and I'm married to Dean, and I'll just let him tell how we kind of got going.
We were probably kind of led towards missions together a little bit through Cru Christmas conferences and hearing the statistics in the world and things like that. And we ended up ministering for 5 or 6 years in Germany with Middle Eastern immigrants, and then 25 years in Turkey.
And I'm Lee, and my wife and I, Kelly and I, have had the opportunity to be overseas about 10 years with Cru. We got involved in Cru at the university level and really felt the mission tug at our hearts, having both had the opportunity to interact with international students on our campus. And so we felt that tug and wanted to be involved. And so we were overseas with Cru for about 10 years. We've done some other international assignments as well, working with international expat churches, and now we're back here in the Omaha area.
And all of you are at Providence Church. We have a global missions team, which is a group of people, all people in our church that are helping our church look at caring about the nations, serving with our partners overseas, and helping us as a church be able to send people overseas. And so I just thank you guys for your leadership and your work there. I would love to hear, give any stories about how you became interested in global missions. So whether that was a defining moment or a passage or maybe just a gradual process, but how did you actually kind of catch a passion for global missions?
I had the opportunity to do a short-term missions trip in the Middle East, and standing in this major metropolitan area, the major business square that we were in, we could look in any direction, and we were seeing several 100,000 individuals, people going about their day-to-day work, and the realization was that in that specific country, those individuals that we were seeing, really 360, had no opportunity to read the Bible in their own language, to understand the message of salvation through Jesus and his provision for us, and be involved in a local church. That was so compelling for Kelly and I. We knew that we wanted to then make a commitment to be involved some way, somehow, for the rest of our lives in the process of bringing the message to people who hadn't heard, who hadn't seen, had no access. So that was kind of, at the university level, our engagement.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think statistics were very key for us. Like back in those days, they would say that about 9 out of 10 of the trained Christian workers were in North America, leaving a tenth of the trained Christian workers to reach 9/10 of the world. And so different things like that, just the needs and statistics. And like I said, God brought us along together. We were together at Campus Crusade, Cru, Christmas conference and things like that. And just hearing those great needs kept drawing us in that direction. Okay.
Why do you think that is? You said so 9/10 of trained Christian workers kind of stay in North America. Why is that? Well, why is that number like that?
Today, that statistic may be a little bit different because Latin America, China, different parts of the world, Asia, have the gospel has taken hold. So there's missionaries coming from those countries into other countries. So I'm not sure today, but I think a lot of the training was happening here. The quality seminaries and training was happening here, and people, it's just more comfortable to go back to a culturally like setting rather than going to the rest of the world.
Yeah, just to tag on with that, I feel like it's so natural when you're doing ministry because it's so relational to get tied in there. It takes so much to uproot and then go to another culture, which is probably why it's just normal for all these workers to stay where the gospel is already present, which is kind of sad, but understandable. For me, I think that I knew, okay, I want to pursue missions when I went on a short term to the Philippines. And I was a freshman in high school, the youngest person on the trip, and didn't really know if I belonged on it, but enjoyed it. And there was one day where we went and we went ahead and visited this, I don't know if I'd call it a street house. What happened essentially is 3 local women from the Philippines didn't have families, but had a heart for kids. And they saw that there were these boys who were just on the street because families said, we can't afford to have you anymore. So you're just not allowed to live at our house. And so they just adopted them and said, okay, come and live with us. And for whatever reason, our youth leader was like, Hosanna, you should share your testimony. And so as I was sharing my testimony with them and just kind of expressing the journey I'd gone through in my life, this image of Romans 10 came to mind where it says, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news, but how are they going to hear unless someone is sent to them? And I just thought of those 3 women who had chosen to dedicate their lives to opening their hands so that these boys would hear the good news. And seeing that cross-culturalness, I felt a draw to pursue that with my life as well.
If I can stay on the theme of kind of the statistic, Dean, that you said, with some of those stories, I love just hearing the different ways that God has used to kind of call you guys into this. And I'm sure you could ask missionaries all around the world, just hear the unique stories of what God has done. I remember for myself personally, I was in college and become a Christian, was a Christian for a couple years, and I never really thought about global missions. And for me, it was when somebody had actually asked me, it was another college ministry, asked me to come and preach on global missions. And they didn't give me a passage or anything. They just said, come and teach on global missions. And so I had to actually wrestle with the scriptures, and some of those things just started popping out. Different Psalms, the stories of Abraham, Great Commission, all these things just started to show that this isn't just an idea that's in a few places in the Bible, but this really is the heart of God. And so if that is all true, and we see God working in different people's lives that way, yet as the church we still have a statistic that maybe isn't 9/10 still, but probably pretty close to that, I would guess. Is it important for the church to change that statistic and start to equip and send a greater number of missionaries overseas?
It's pretty staggering when you look at the current statistics. In our world right now, we have roughly 7.7 billion people population, and that has just. I remember when we first got involved in missions, that number was not nearly that high. But as you look at that 7.7 billion, we know statistically that there's roughly 7,400 unreached people groups yet in the world. And when we say unreached, we're talking about they don't have the Bible in their own language. They don't have an indigenous church that they can attend. They don't have anybody in their sphere of influence that can speak to them on the message of Christ. If you take the top 50 of those unreached people groups, we know that they all have over 1 million people in that. So it's a staggering number. I think 3.2 billion people that have yet to have the opportunity to hear about Christ. And so that's pretty compelling. I mean, in our own lives, how can we spend our day-to-day trying to get the message to them? And so, again, for me and for Kelly and for all of us, I guess, on the GMT, as we're talking about how do we have an impact, we have 3 different groups in our global missions team: the educational team, the prayer team, and the sending team. If we can focus even on the things that are low-hanging fruit, if we will, the praying element, praying for those individuals in those unreached people groups, praying that God would just appear to them in a vision, appear to them in a dream, that somehow they'd be exposed to the message of the gospel and they could have an interaction with that and come to know who Christ is. I mean, that's so critical. The other elements of our global missions team, too, the education element, training and talking about what's happening worldwide and how we can be involved in that. And then the sending group, how can we resource those individuals being raised up within our own church who want to go, who feel called to go, being involved with them before, during, and after their sending. That's really kind of the heartbeat of our team. We've got such a great leadership team. We've got a great number of people involved in the global missions team as well. There's about 20 or so. And so it's just exciting to see God at the very grassroots level, the kind of the organic element of raising people up within our own church to be involved.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers are staggering to think about. When you mentioned the unreached, of thinking, still billions of people or thousands of people groups, so different cultures of people, it's not just that they've rejected God, but they don't even have access to hear that God loves them and sent his son to save them. And so, when you think about it like that, and it can be big numbers and seem daunting, but when you kind of humanize that to think there's real people that are living without getting the message of Jesus is heartbreaking. And it should be what compels us. Maybe, Dean and Cindy, could you share too? So there's the broad statistics of that there's all these unreached people. But in your ministry and missions over the last few decades, what's been anything else that's kind of driven a heart for missions, or what's been kind of the underlying passion that's kind of allowed you guys to give your life to this?
Well, I was just going to say, statistically, like the last 14 years, we worked in a part of the city where there's about 1 million people, so about the size of the Omaha greater metro area. And our house church was the only church in that area of 1 million people. And just the joy of rubbing shoulders daily with people, whether you're going to a restaurant or a shop or anywhere, and you're very likely the first Christian that they've ever met, or even just known names and gotten into a conversation about and things like that, So we're providing access to the gospel to an area that has super low access,
Which that doesn't, that's hard to compute, right? Like that doesn't even make sense to us because I don't even know how many churches Omaha has, but there's just churches everywhere. And, everyone's familiar with Christianity. So to be just putting that imagery of being in a city like Omaha and being the only small group of Christians that the whole city, you guys are the access to the gospel is a crazy thought.
Just one picture came to my mind was our pastor and his wife visited us several years back, and we were on a road trip with them in our country, and he was like, well, what about this town that we just passed through? Or how many believers would be in that town? And we're like, that's only 50,000. I mean, we're not going to send any worker out unless there's 100,000. There's no, and he's just like, oh my goodness, in Nebraska, that's just so weird to get your mind around that. But I guess I would also say just when we would online get, news of somebody that wants to sit down and talk about the gospel, somebody that's interested, you can't help but be excited and motivated, to just see that there's people out there that want to learn and want to grow and hear about it.
Part of that, too, is us remembering our own story when Christ became real to us and the transformation in our own lives, when we realize the truth of forgiveness and grace and mercy and salvation. I mean, that's a huge compeller, too. You want to have that opportunity, and really it's a blessing for us to have that opportunity to bring that message to others around the world to see that freedom of them coming to know Christ. So that's pretty compelling in and of itself.
Really, the gospel didn't start here in America either. It came to us from another country. And so, if it would have been a dead end, we might not have heard. So we don't want to be a dead end in the gospel and keep sharing it on.
Yeah, I love, I think John Piper says that missions exist because worship doesn't, right? So there's places around the world where not only does God deserve worship and praise, but when we actually live in accordance with how we were created, to worship God, be with him, experience life with him, then we experience the greatest human flourishing and joy. And because that's not happening, then missions exist, right? So it's not just a Western frontier kind of idea. This is God's heart, is that he would be praised and that people would actually experience life with him. And because that's not happening, it's the church's responsibility to go and our privilege to get to be a part of it. I'd love to hear, so with some of that, maybe Hosanna, I'll start with you. Share maybe just a couple stories of how you've seen God be faithful, either in your time overseas or even as you've been here, you've worked with international students. And so we haven't really talked about that component, but all of you have been a part of international student ministry or engaging with internationals here. How have you seen God be faithful or him work, and you've kind of seen his heart for the nations in your life?
I think the joy of being in Omaha is getting to run at unreached people groups with a community of believers. Global Friends has been a really fun ministry for me while I've been in Omaha to be involved with. And so we have some Global Friends staff on the couch here with us. But I think the opportunity to be trained in what an M28 Bible study or a Discovery Bible study is, and do that with people. I think of a couple of years back, I was doing a Discovery Bible study Friday night at Julie Aaron's home. And there was just this Japanese girl who just had a light turn on in her when we were talking about God and who he is. And it is so fun because there have been times when I haven't been in Omaha and she's been here, but then someone else has been tag teaming and doing a Bible study with her. There have been seasons where I've been able to do a Bible study with her. And so I think just the faithfulness of God pursuing her heart, whether I can be present or not, has been really good. And in that, also have people train me up in what it means to love someone who's from a different culture and to study their culture well.
Yeah, Dean and Cindy, any stories that come to your mind and just off the top of your head from your time overseas?
Well, maybe a couple things. We have a guy who has almost zero education and is paralyzed from the waist down, lives in a wheelchair, takes care of himself, but he came to Christ, and he's become kind of our evangelist guy that carries on when we're not there, or he's my sidekick, and now a new guy is there. And just sharing his passion for Christ, and sometimes we fill in a little more of the theology of it. But to see God using someone like that, the very weakest of people in the gospel. In the last 3 years we were there, we probably saw, maybe with the children and stuff, maybe 9 or 10 people come to Christ, a number of people be baptized, and kind of all of them in their 40s. Like, it was interesting, kind of upper 30s and their 40s, and just had the joy of seeing that happen. I kind of call people almost like precious jewels in Turkey, or diamonds, because we don't see as many come to Christ, but we put high value on every single one, kind of.
Yeah, so Lee, what about for you? Any stories that come to mind of just how you've seen God's faithfulness? So you felt called into missions, you've given your life to it in different forms. Mm-hmm. Where have you seen God be faithful to that, or just stories that come to the top of your head?
I just, there are a couple stories that just come right away, and one of them is an international student who came to our ESL program when Kelly and I were working with the international students at Christ Community Church. This gentleman came from Iraq. His family was very influential, and just through God's amazing plan, this individual was brought to Lincoln, Nebraska. He was going to be sent back to the country of Iraq for for jail time because of their stance against the regime. But God brought him through the U.S. State Department to Lincoln, Nebraska. He heard about an ESL program, a conversation English program in Omaha through his own research, came to Christ Community Church on his own, and then got involved in the ESL program there, met with the internationals, and we've maintained that friendship today. He's now become a U.S. citizen. He's working with the U.S. military, but he's come, and we have been praying for him for years. And he's very close, we feel, but he's heard the message of the gospel. He knows that we love him because Christ loves him. And so to see God bring somebody through that methodology to come to Omaha to hear the message. Another thing that I would just bring out, we've talked about statistics a lot, as we think about the Omaha public school system, over 153 different languages being spoken. And so you think of Omaha, Nebraska, how can we have an international impact? Well, 153 nationalities out of what's the total population, or total number, like 220 some countries in the world. We've got a huge number right here in Omaha. So as we look at, having an impact internationally, we don't have to go very far. We cross the street, or we can just talk to our student in one of our classes, the opportunities that God has continued to really lay before us abundantly. We just have to have eyes to see and ears to hear and be available to speak the truth when we have that opportunity.
What do you guys think? What's the danger if a church, or we could even think of Providence specifically, what's the danger if we don't think about global missions, if we don't prioritize global missions? What's the problem with that?
First of all, it's disobedience, and disobedience is dangerous, and it tends to lead to being kind of, what do we say, myopic or whatever, kind of just centering on our own church and not looking outside, kind of.
Yeah, I'd just say we miss the joy and the fun of all the exciting stories of God doing wild and crazy things.
I think of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men." And though we can still be salty in our own context and carry the gospel to our neighbors, there's an entire world out there that God has called us to be salt and light to. And so if we're not, just like Dean said, we're being disobedient, which is a very scary place to be when you have a just and righteous God that you're serving. I think of Francis Chan. He has this illustration he uses where he says, everyone's busy fishing in the same pond. And it's like, you get your lines all tangled up because you're fishing the same place, but like 5 miles down the road, if you'll walk, there's this huge lake with a ton of fish that no one is at. And it's like, God has specifically empowered and enabled the church to not just be in a small pond kind of fighting each other about, no, that person goes to our church and that they're a Christian for our church and we just saved them and that's our story. Instead, he's been like, there's so many unbelievers. Why aren't we sending people to them?
Yeah, I love that you guys mentioned both the idea that this is just basic obedience, that if this is God's heart and his call, then it's just obedient for the church to walk in this. I also love, Cindy, that you mentioned just the joy of it. Like I think about different missionaries or people that work with international students I know. They're some of the most fun, joy-filled, and crazy people in some ways because they just get to experience so many stories. Like if you've been around other people that have shared stories about overseas or work in that context, just some of the stories that you get to be a part of is just so life-giving to even just hear about, much less be a part of. So there's the obedience factor, and there's just it's obedient because God is always for our joy, and he wants us to be about his mission, and he wants us to get to play a part in that and to experience that. So maybe off of that, so if we as a church need to care about global missions and prioritize it, help us think through, is that for every member in a local church? Is that, we have our global mission team, so we as a church are doing it. How does the average person listening to this, who maybe has never really thought much about global missions, is this a call for every single person or just the church as a whole?
John Piper has this saying, there's those who go, there's those who send, and there's those who are disobedient. So I would say, yes, everyone is called to be invited in. It's not going to look like the same thing. If you're listening to this, please know that this isn't telling you need to pack up all your belongings and move to like the most rural, obscure place that you've never heard of. That's not what we're saying. But everyone is invited into this adventure. So if you're a parent, wow, what an amazing opportunity. Would you prayerfully consider maybe my child's going to be involved in some way. Could we pray together as a family for a mission partner and just ask the questions? What is missions? What kind of adventures can God call us into? You have such a powerful voice right there. There's another mission sending organization that says people will either go, send, learn, pray, mobilize, or welcome. So 6 different ways you can be involved. You can do a combination of them. And if you're not doing any of those right now, I would just ask you to maybe ask yourself some honest questions about why not, because it's a joy that God's calling you to.
I think we should all just do business with God too. And if he's Lord of our lives, we should not just quickly say, well, I do a short term or two, or that's my thing. Have we decided that, or has God really said? So it takes prayer and wrestling with it through. And I think more should be going even long term than are going. Like Jim Elliott said, a call, they don't need a call. They need a kick in the seat of the pants. So there's some of that. And wrestling with sending our children. I think that's another thing. A lot of us would probably hold back, or that would make us comfortable. So from an early age, praying through that, not being afraid of educating them in global missions and motivating them in that direction.
Yeah, let me maybe hit some of the different categories. So you just brought up a few different categories for people. So as we kind of transition this to being a little bit more centered on, so as people are trying to think through what to do or what this actually looks like, let's think about first the idea of going. Okay, so if people are wrestling with the idea of going, I know that one of the fears or the hesitations of people is one, just the idea of leaving a comfort zone, like we've talked about, actually picking up and moving. But another real fear or hesitation for people, I think, is what does that look like, if I have a family already, or if I want a family. So if I want to be a husband and a dad, or a mom and a wife, or, if I'm going to have these kids overseas, that's a very real hesitation. So maybe, Lee, can I start with you? Would you speak to, from the kind of husband, parent type role, can you speak to people that maybe that's a hesitation for them? Maybe they're starting to sense that the Lord's calling them, but they're a little bit nervous about that. From your own experience and just as a whole, how would you encourage somebody in that position?
Just from a perspective of a family, wanting to have a family, and then knowing that you're called and you want to go overseas and serve in that capacity, I would say, just from our experience, we went as a young family, young married couple, and then actually had our family overseas. The challenge there, again, a lot of it can be taken care of in your sending organization, your sending church. And so at Providence, as we're talking about people who are called to go, a big thing that we are really wanting to communicate and demonstrate and be better equipped in is being that advocate, being that that family of the individual going, staying connecting, helping them get prepared and trained, and then being their connectivity while they're on the field, emotionally, financially, spiritually, however we can, because they're a member of our family. We don't want to just send them off and be out there by themselves. And so that connectivity with that advocacy group, that support group, is so critical for anyone going or anyone considering to go. And I would say as well, our experience has been as internationally, the expat community is very very strong, and then the expat community within those who are working within ministry is very strong as well.
So Dean and Cindy, you guys too, you lived overseas, you had a family. Maybe just share what that was like, or speak to the person who's hesitant because they want a family or they have a family, they don't know how that fits with going overseas.
One thing for us, I think education probably is a difficult thing sometimes that needs to be solved. Sometimes family back here that have needs, it ends up being an issue also. But I would say it was a very enriching thing for our kids. And I think we're at I get a little emotional, a tighter family from that. And we've got a very good marriage. And I think maybe being the two of us kind of against the world over there a little bit maybe was so I would say there's many. Our kids would, every one of them, say they're glad that that's where they grew up.
I think, like Lee mentioned too, just the whole community of other workers, was just very, very rich, for our kids. And those are their aunts and uncles. You couldn't ask for anything better for your kids, to have that experience. And we were in a culture that was just fun and warm. And like Dean said, we were just very, very fortunate. God was good. We were just blessed by God that he just took care of some of the things that maybe could be issues. And you just kind of have a lot of support from your sending agency or whatever.
Cindy, did you have any fears going into that, thinking about being a wife and a mom and raising kids overseas? Was that a real thing for you that you had to wrestle through?
Oh, yeah, they're definitely, I remember even moving there, I was like concerned about the health care, and they didn't use seat belts in the taxis. There was just numbers of things that you prayed through. And we did small MK school. We did homeschooling. We did a little bit of the national school for kindergarten. And then finally at the end with our last child, she got to go to an international school. So we had all kinds of different schooling options that we needed to do because different things worked and different things fell through. And so, yeah, we tried it all.
Hosanna, would you maybe share a little bit on the idea of sending, right? So you said that there's the idea that people either are goers or in other categories that they're senders. So for people that are wrestling with this and maybe that isn't where they're going is long term. I love that, Dean, you mentioned there's probably more of those people than we have right now. So we do want to challenge people to consider that. But if that isn't what the Lord has for them and they're a part of a local church here, would you speak to those people of what does that look like for them to help send missionaries and be about the nations, even if they don't move overseas?
Yeah, so I'd say it starts by learning. It's hard to be an effective sender if you don't know someone who's a goer. And so if you don't know someone who's a goer, I would challenge you to ask your church, but also as you learn about a mission partner, you can start praying for them. You can write encouragement letters to them. Something Lee mentioned earlier was that idea of relational partnership, which there's a lovely woman in our congregation who right now monthly Zoom calls with one of our partners in Thailand just to talk with her and pray with her. And it's such an intentional devotion of time, which really creates stability for that mission partner, which I'm so thankful for. Another thing is financial support. A lot of missionaries cannot do a formalized job in their place, and so they are bound by fundraising. And if they have to invest so much of their time on fundraising, it detracts from their ability to actually be disciple makers and be building those discipleship relationships in the region where they're from. So that's another way that people can get involved. Mobilizing also is a part of that. And so I think of Lee when I think of the word mobilize, because there's just a part of his story that has been written with cross-cultural ability and connections and pieces. And that means that you have the ability to develop people and train them. So if you have discipled people before, you can disciple the goers in what it means to be a disciple maker.
Yeah, and what I love about both of those, both the going and the sending, is that at Providence we've been blessed with a number of people that either have been overseas, like you guys we have people that have been overseas for a few months, a few years, a few decades. And so if you're wrestling with going, we have people in our church that you can actually go to and connect with and start wrestling through some of these things and hear the stories and hear how maybe you guys had similar fears that they're having right now, which is just a huge blessing. But we also have a number of people that are kind of in the pipeline who want to go overseas. So as you're talking about being a sender and building relationships, we not only have a few partners overseas, but we have people in our church right now that are in the process to where over the next year, 3 years, 5 years want to be serving overseas, that we can actually build relationships with, help think about the financial, the prayer, the relational needs that they might have. And so I just love that's part of the beauty of the local church is that it's all here and we have it here available to us. It's just kind of wrestling through those two things. One more category I want to hit before we wrap up, though, is the idea of welcoming. So we've said this a few times. We have a ton of international students in Omaha, different groups of immigrants and refugees. So people from the nations are coming to Omaha where we don't have to pack up and go all the time. But even for the person who's not called to that, who's here in Omaha, not only can we help send overseas, but we can be a part of reaching the nations here. And so, Dean and Cindy, this is part of your ministry now and what you guys are doing while you're here in Omaha. Could you give any words to the person just to help encourage them to maybe be a welcomer and what that looks like here in Omaha?
Well, yeah, every Friday night now we have a group of internationals come to our home and do hospitality, do Discovery Bible studies, have another track of sharing and everything, and we super enjoy it because we're strange people now. We're kind of hybrid people, and so that's really where we're the most comfortable is with international types or whatever. Last year, one neat thing, Cindy should maybe share it, but we had a neat thing where a Chinese doctor returned after 7 years to Omaha. She said, I wanted to tell Julie about the fruit in my life from having trusted Christ here a few years ago. She influenced another doctor from her country, and then that one was a part of another Japanese young woman coming to Christ. So that was really special to see like a chain reaction of internationals, some different ones of us, but also the internationals themselves being involved in reaching other internationals.
Yeah, and I think you guys know that one of the cool things about Global Friends is they try to reach the people that are the least reached, so they're right here going to school, and it's been really fun to get to know some of these Omani girls. And last night we were having our fall party, and we were, decorating, doing the jack-o'-lanterns and everything, and a couple of those girls, were in my group, but I hadn't really gotten to know them at all. And then finally at the end of the evening, we were sitting around, and this one girl, I was like, boy, that's really pretty manicure you got. Those. Did you do that yourself? And then she told me she had a little boy at home, and we learned all about each other. And it's just so easy to make friends with international students. I mean, about all you have to do is smile and say one thing, they're ready to be your friend.
What is it, about 50% maybe? I think maybe about 50% of international students and scholars are never in an American home while they're here.
Yeah, it is so cool to see God's just goodness and faithfulness in the day we live in, where travel is easy, where people moving around from different countries or going to school in different places is so accessible now to so many different people that even here in Omaha, we have the nations here. And I love one of the stories from Global Friends is there was a woman who became a Christian while she was here in the States and has moved back to Japan since then. And in February of 2020, a few of us from here at Providence, we went over to Japan to see them. And so she became a Christian here, got married, moved back to Japan, and now they're part of a church planting network. And Japan is one of the most least reached, places around the world. And so a student that came here, that was invested in here, is now helping plant churches in one of the least reached places. And so it's just cool to see how God has just worked through all different sorts of means. So I think one of the exciting things is no matter who you are, no matter what kind of stage you are in life, there's a role for you in the global mission of God. And so whether that's you considering going, helping send, or just being a welcomer here to the many different internationals that we have here, all of that is available. And like we've said, that's the call of God on our life. And so, Lee, could we maybe wrap up with you? Give for the person who's interested some a next step or a few next steps. As a person who's interested in getting more involved in global missions, maybe they've been persuaded by the stories and they feel like God's doing something. Where do they go from this point?
I would say reach out to us directly in the global missions team, and we've got meetings that we get together every week of the month. And then we'd love to hear your story. What's making you interested? What is it about the global missions element that really sparked something in your life that you want to be involved? And we want to help you understand that a little bit better, or help us understand your desire there. And then we'd love to have you get connected in the global missions team, whatever element that might be. Give you a chance to kind of see the different elements that we're working in and hear how you can be plugged in as well. So contact us directly, either through Raven or Andrew or Hosanna or anyone on the church staff. We'd love to connect with you and share with you a little bit more and have you join us in some of those activities, as well as Dean and Cindy having you maybe come and participate in some of our ministry partners, Global Friends, on Friday and Saturday nights, or some of the other activities we have going on. it's that personal interaction that we'd love for you to get a taste of and take it to the next step. And obviously, we want to join with you in that and pray for you as you consider what your involvement will be.
Any other final words?
I would just maybe add that our whole team has a super wide age range too, so there's people that we can maybe direct you to that would connect well with you, based on experience or age or place in life, kind of.
Amen. Well, we hope this conversation has been fruitful and helpful for you. And as we said at the beginning, we hope that you might find your place within God's mission to reach the nations. And so if you are wrestling with anything, you want to ask any questions or do any follow-ups or figure out where you can get involved, please do reach out. We'd love to talk to you, and we'd love to help you join in God's mission.